Could I get everyone to take their seats?
Nervousness gives you that edge. Trust me. You're going to be fantastic. Okay.
Could everybody kind of go out there and chase everybody back in the room, please? Hello? I know you guys are having a long day, but we're going to do a presentation right now that it's important to get your attention for. I went to the Métis Nation of British Columbia's annual assembly this year, and when I was there, they had, like a market thing where you could walk around and look at all the booths and stuff and see what was new. And I went to the health department stuff, and I found something there that I thought was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life or ever heard about. And I asked them to come to our assembly and tell us about their new thing. And because I think we all need to get involved with this, and I think it needs to be more than a Northern BC project. So we're going to get Katina. That's correct. I was just making sure I said her name right. To actually talk about this. Katina works for the Métis Nation of British Columbia in their health department, and I took this job away from my little chairs here. I'm sorry, but I'm going to get her to explain to you what all women need in this country.
All right, Tansi, everyone. I just first off want to thank President Melanie Omniho and Vice President Victoria Pruden for giving me the opportunity to present today. Sorry. All right, so I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Katina Pollard. I'm a proud Métis community member from the Thompson-Okanagan region in British Columbia. I'm also the Northern Regional Health Coordinator for Métis Nation of British Columbia and Project Lead for Cervix Check, which is what I'm happily going to talk about today. So I don't know if you've done this already, but I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So the who, what, whys of cancer. Cancer is more common in older adults, but can be diagnosed at any age. However, we're finding that cervical cancer is found to be diagnosed in younger years, between the ages of 30 and 69. Cancer is a group of more than 100 diseases. Although different, they have three things in common. The first, there's an abnormal growth of cells in the body. The second, the cells can invade or move into other tissues and organs. And the third, the cells can spread through means of blood to other organs. There are many possible causes of cancer. Some of the known causes are genetics, family, and lifestyle, as well as tobacco use, infections, poor diet, and environmental exposures. So cervical cancer is most commonly caused by HPV, the human papillomavirus. For HPV infection to lead to cervical cancer, it must be present for many years or even decades. For this reason, it is very important to regularly attend screening in order to identify individuals at risk for having changes to the cervix. HPV is a very common infection that most people will have at some point in their lives. Most of the time, the infection goes away naturally without causing any health issues or without a person even knowing they have it. HPV is passed from person to person through intimate skin-to-skin sexual contact. There are over 100 HPV types, which are grouped as either low risk or high risk. High-risk types may lead to genital, anal, or head and neck cancers if they last for many years and are not detected and treated. Most HPV-related cancers are preventable with vaccines or early detection. In Canada, cervical cancer screening is done by examining the cells of the cervix through the use of a Pap test. In recent years, medical advances have created more effective tools to identify individuals at risk for having cervical cancer and precancer earlier by testing HPV directly using HPV testing. So this leads me to Cervix Check. Cervix Check is a research project that is currently available by invitation only from participating centers in British Columbia. The findings from this initial research project will inform possible expansion in the future throughout BC and the nation. Cervix Check is offered at no cost to the women during the pilot project. So Cervix Check offers HPV testing, which is safe and highly researched method for cervical cancer screening. Many countries have already started using or planning to use HPV testing in their screening programs, including Canada. Through Cervix Checks, you will collect your sample using a vaginal swab. The sample is then tested for HPV at the lab. So as you can see on the PowerPoint, there are 5 easy steps. You sign up online, you get your kit in the mail, you collect your sample in the privacy of your own home, you drop it off at your post office, and you get your results back. So Cervix Check was created as a way to address some of the challenges women face keeping up to date with cervical cancer screening. Some of the reasons include not having time during regular clinic hours, or they're working during clinic hours, having a male family doctor or a family doctor who does not do Pap testing. Simply, they're just uncomfortable with a pelvic exam due to previous experiences such as sexual assaults. It can also be a heavy financial burden traveling to and from these clinics. Women are also don't have an understanding of what cervical cancer is and the symptoms that are associated with the disease. And lastly, time and distance to travel to the clinics. For instance, one woman in Haida Gwaii I was speaking with, she had to take 2 days off of work, travel to Prince Rupert for over a 7-hour commute, and have her consult, and then come back another time for the actual procedure. So this is a very, very big burden. And then to the right here, we have our actual kit. So this is the current phase of the project we have going on. At the end of the month, this is a poster we've developed. At the end of the month, we'll be going out to the 3 Northwest communities. So we'll be going to Smithers, Prince Rupert, and Terrace. So we ultimately want to know how the community, citizens, and all the members want to rule out the program, whether by mail, whether by health clinics, or at friendship centers, or all of the above. We want to know if there's any changes they want to the project. And then we'll also be working with local post offices and local physicians. Not done yet. So I'll leave you with this. I was recently at the World Indigenous Cancer Conference, and this really stuck with me when I left. But the longest case of a positive screening test to an actual cancer diagnosis was over 6 years. This is way too long. We need to shorten this and get back on track, and Cervix Check is absolutely going to help with this. And then in conclusion, Métis Nation British Columbia is excited to be a pilot partner on this work with BC Cancer. And we absolutely agree that this should be available for all Métis women. We're hopeful that after this particular pilot rolls out in the Northwest, we can demonstrate a clear need for Métis women and advocate and work toward the rest of British Columbia, and then hopefully the rest of Canada. Thank you.
So I'm not sure if you guys understand the significance. So do you have one of them here?
I did, yes. And I was just going to add, I did bring some sample kits, and feel free to come and take a look, and you can actually play with them.
So
And actually, Alicia Fernando is here as well. She is the women's rep for the Northwest, so feel free to ask her questions as well.
So the relevance of this is, number one, you know, there's very little research being done in relationship to Métis specific, but our young women are going to be impacted by HPV. Many of them didn't get immunity shots when they were in school, like maybe they should have, and HPV is becoming very prevalent. And the issue is a significant one because, number one, many of our young women will never be able to be bearing children if they end up with HPV, and it creates problems because it does compromise their cervixes. Even if detected, the issue is that they are, and if it's not detected early enough, they're going to compromise their ability to bear children. And in our community, I think that that's a really important part of who we are, and I don't want to see our young women have the issue. But the other part of this that I want to tell you guys is, for many, many years, and I don't care which one of us it was, we have fewer and fewer doctors that are family doctors anymore. It's hard to get a doctor that's just your doctor, and we're often put in situations where we end up being a part of a medical clinic and many doctors and different things. Well, this is a self-administered Pap test. Now, why didn't they come up with this for women a very long time ago? And I think that we should watch this study closely, and we should be pushing Health Canada to let every woman have a self-administered Pap test every year. It's intrusive to have women have the experiences, and many never go and get their Pap test done when they're supposed to and end up very vulnerable. So I really, when I seen this thing, I thought, wow, why didn't they come up? So you actually have to go and look at it. It's a very cute little device that is kind of like a little Q-tip brush that you do your thing with, send it in the mail, and you're done. You don't have to have anybody put great big things in ankles and stirrups and all that other crazy stuff. So I am lobbying that we push Health Canada to make women's health a much bigger priority and more respectful of who we are.
I think they allotted some time for Q&A, if anyone has any questions. Oh, here we go.
Good afternoon. My name is Joey Lee. I'm from New Dawn in Region 4 in Alberta. How long is your pilot project supposed to last?
So it has been, we've been working on it for a year, and then we're just going to be working with the Northwest, so I would assume we'll wrap it up within the year, the next year.
And will you be able to share any of that information with all of the provinces?
So that's what we're trying to collect as data, and we'll definitely be doing that.
Anita? Thank you, Anita Campbell, Manitoba. So I'm trying to, because I had heard about this in the news. It was like on the news, what day is it today? Friday? Is today Friday? It was on the news, I think, Monday or Tuesday this week, that they were doing this study. But it's only in that province, right? Like they,
In BC.
yeah, it's only happening right now in BC. The difficulty with, so I mean, we would be interested to find out, and I think everybody would be interested to find out the results of that study. Because one of the things is that those studies mostly come from your provincial governments. And so, because they look at it as it falls under provincial legislation and provincial responsibility. So I think part of our responsibility also is to make sure that we're pushing the results of that study provincially with our respective provincial governments, because it's something that I think that was said before, it's something that should have come a long time ago. I think the results are going to come back quite positive in terms of the willingness and the welcoming, I'll say, of women being able to do this test at home as opposed to going and getting it done in a clinic somewhere. But I think it's something that we need to keep on top of and make sure that we're also keeping track of it to present to our health ministers at the provincial level. Because it's something I think that in Manitoba we have Cancer Care Manitoba, and in all provinces have similar entities, and I think it's something that we can build a relationship with our cancer care affiliations or organizations within each of our provinces to make sure that's something that's being pushed and something that's continued to talk about. So I want to thank you for the presentation. I think it was something, because it piqued my interest when I first heard about it, that it was something that, you know, would be good if they could have it all throughout Canada, and that we're all able to do these tests at home. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and question. Does anybody have any other questions? Oh.
Thank you very much. I'm the Minister of Health in the province of Manitoba, and there is a call for proposals for research, and it's with the Cancer Partnership Against Cancer with the federal government. So just a question for BC. So is this funded through MNBC, or is it funded through your women's group? And is it a Pan-Aboriginal or is it Métis specific?
Sorry, can you repeat? It's very.
Is it Pan-Aboriginal research in the survey, or is it Métis specific? A, and B, is it through MNBC or is it through Victoria? What's your Métis Women of British Columbia?
So with the project, we're working with UNBC, UBC, the research team, and they've granted a ethics approval for it. So we're now working with BC Cancer to get it with the Indigenous health team there. Not only is it Métis specific, but it's also First Nations are working on it as well.
Yeah, my question is it with MNBC or is it with, like, I understand the research component of it and I understand the University of British Columbia, but is your partner with MNBC?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, if I could just respond. Yeah, it is through the MNBC Ministry of Health, I mean, in cooperation and partnership with us, but it's not funded under our women's ministry, it's under health.
Any last questions? All right, well, thank you, Katina, for your presentation, and thank you, Melanie, for recognizing the importance of this issue and bringing it here to start this conversation. So thank you. So we're now going to move on to the workshop on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I'd like to call up Lisa Pigeot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Katina, for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. This part, it's going to be a bit of a shared venture with Melanie and, President Amenaho and I. So we're just going to, we don't want to take up too much space in the history of what led us to where we are today. And of course, the most important part of this part of the day is to get your feedback on the implementation pieces of the calls to change and calls to action of the inquiry. We just thought we'd start with just a very, very brief high-level overview of the MMIW and MMIWG. The MMIWG, of course, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So colonial violence has always been a reality of Métis women living under the rule of the Canadian state. We've been speaking about violence for decades, and only recently has Canada started to listen. So there's a few foundational pieces that led up to the inquiry. Amnesty International had a movement called No More Stolen Sisters it says 2005, but it was 2004. NWAC began their Sisters in Spirit campaign in 2010. And then Marianne Pierce created a database of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in 2013. Indigenous women, girls, and LGBTQ2S people now make up around 25% of homicide victims. And there's a higher rates of both stranger and domestic violence. And after all of this, Canada heard and called for a national inquiry. The inquiry had a mandate to look into and report on the systemic cause of all forms of violence against Indigenous women and girls, including sexual violence. And they wanted to examine the underlying social, economic, institutional, and historical causes that contribute to the ongoing violence and particular vulnerabilities, as well as the increased rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So the National Inquiry released their report. So the inquiry started in 2016. It was a very difficult process for Métis women, and I'm sure you're all aware of how vocal LFMO AGM has been throughout throughout this process, and how they've excluded the voice of Métis women in this whole entire process, and made it very culturally unsafe for our women to participate, our families to participate. But throughout their information gathering process, they examined 2,386 truth gathering stories, and they call it part of their truth gathering process. There was 15 community hearings and 9 knowledge keeper, expert, and institutional hearings. You can read all that statistics. But basically, as a result of all that, there was no real meaningful engagement and participation and safety for Métis women. So quickly on, we realized that we had to launch into our own process, to write a report, to make sure that the reality of our Métis women and girls was stated. And we were very clear that it had to be from our voice, not from a pan-Indigenous voice, and not from somebody else's pen. It needed to come from us. Although there was 231 calls to justice in the inquiry's report that was released in June, we know that we needed to really state and be very clear on what our calls for change needed to be, and to make a difference and to reduce those rates. And let's be really honest, we just want to eliminate missing and murdered Métis women and girls, and really all any violence against our Métis women and girls. So in the inquiry's calls for justice, I just wanted to highlight certain areas that their calls to actions focused on. So they focused on human rights, culture, health and wellness, human security, justice, media and social influences, transportation, police services, law, education, social workers, and the extractive industries. The inquiry process was incredibly expensive. They completed their work, and we still needed to go on. So for just a fraction of what the inquiry cost, LFMO AGM was able to put together a report that we could clearly state what our needs were. I wanted to ask President Omenaho if she could just talk a little bit about the reality that Métis women faced throughout the inquiry process, as far as the negativity that was faced. What a brat? Okay, I'll just continue on. I have slides. I'm not a brat.
She is a brat. Many of you know, because I raised this at this table, probably at least 2, if not 3 annual meetings, and at all the Métis Nation assemblies. Métis women were excluded from participating. In fact, to the point where, and I don't know how many of you have been able to read the final report, but if you're able to review even parts of it identify that they wanted to eliminate the Métis Nation and make us a part of a pan-Indigenous approach, and we shouldn't have anything specific to us, is what the commissioners reported. That's how toxic it was. They actually tried to annihilate us within their report. But we knew early on, we had asked, they had done a report that was supposed to go towards schools. In there, they basically identified as a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Nobody really knew who we were or what we were. And they were going to use that as an instrument to use within the school settings. And we fought and argued, along with the Inuit, that they shouldn't even be doing resource guides for schools, that wasn't within their mandate. Throughout the entire process, we tried to have Métis engagement. We tried to have our own Métis process where we would have the opportunity to come together and do some truth gathering of our own. And they just didn't allow or leave room for that. In fact, actually, when the federal government was giving them a really bad time at the exclusion of the Métis, they decided to hire Simon Fraser University, and they did call certain Métis women into a meeting. I believe it was in Vancouver, if I remember right. And Simon Fraser had these formulated questions that were going to guide them on whatever they were going to do so that they could tick the ticky box to say they had met with the Métis. The leaders hadn't been invited. They hadn't respectfully approached us at all. And even for us as women of the Métis Nation, when we did put together an invitation list of people who we should be talking to, they completely excluded people that we wanted them to invite and brought these other people, whether they were from Nova Scotia or wherever, to be a reflection of what our Métis voice should be. So we actually boycotted that particular event. And we had gotten commitments by that point from Minister Bennett to be able to help us fund our own research initiative that would provide a report, which is what Lisa's presenting to you now, with our own calls for justice. So, and the federal government has happily accepted our calls to justice, and this report will be a part of the collaborated report with the commission itself. Is there anything else you need me to say?
No, that was perfect as usual. She's still going to call me a brat after this.
I do make a better puppet sometimes than you think.
If any of you know President Ormenaho, she is not one that you want to try to script. But you did great, thank you. So we wanted to talk a bit about our research and what our process was. We had a couple panel discussions, the first of which was back in April of 2018, and we brought some knowledge keepers and our women to the table to begin the discussion around what a Métis-specific report should look like. From that, we assembled a research team, and I'm at the risk of missing somebody, I'm just going to try to name a few. There's A.J. Winterburn, Dr. Jennifer Adisi, Genevieve Benoit, Dr. Jacqueline Maurice, Linda Boudreau, President Omenaho, Trish Kump, Victoria Delarone, and Victoria Pruden all contributed to the writing of this report. And I want to thank each and every one of you for the contribution. It was a long journey to get this report finalized, but your work was significant and important and will leave a legacy of change. And I want to thank you. One of the most important part of our research was gathering some of the stories. You were given our report in your kit. And if you want to review the family stories, they began on page 40 of the report. I just wanted to draw your attention and help you to keep in focus. What we were really trying to do with this report is to not re-victimize the families. We were trying to approach the issue of missing and murdered Métis women and girls from a strength-based. So if you read the stories, they're all about how change can be created and how differences can be made. But if you look after page 40, and there's different titles that are attributed to the family stories. Each one of those titles, I'd like to say, is a direct quote from one of the family members that we've interviewed. So the first section, we talked about, we heard from the families there just wasn't enough. And there wasn't enough support, there wasn't enough involvement with the justice system, there wasn't enough support from the police, there just wasn't enough to help these families navigate through the systems. And when we talk about child and family services, and I think it rings true with even more than our missing and murdered Indigenous women report from a Métis perspective, the comment from that family was, if only they had believed me. Now, how true is that? And we hear of any of the dealings with child and family services. And we talked about many, many difficult conversations, and you'll see some other ones, if love alone could have saved them. There is another comment in there, who's going to cook for you when I gone? That's one of the last comments one of the murdered women had said to her family. So as you're reading the stories, those comments are just intended to put things into focus, that this just isn't words on a paper that we're reading. This is the reality of these families that we're working with. And we can't honor and thank our family members enough for the contribution. On page 100 of this very wordy document, you'll see that we begin our calls for change from a Métis perspective. Our categories differ slightly from that of the national inquiries, as well it should. I'm just going to pull them up. See, normal people could have their notes page on a PowerPoint, but because I'm technologically challenged, the ladies put my PowerPoint together, and my notes are actually on my computer, so I'm going back and forth a bit. Our categories based on data collection and research, identity, which we heard when we were talking about our strategic plan, jurisdiction, criminal justice, implementation, health and wellness, prevention and awareness, intergovernmental affairs, consultation, engagement, and the lack of services and what kind of services need to be made available. We didn't want to make this text have, this just a lecture point of the day. This is where we really require your feedback. I just want to stop for a moment and pause and acknowledge that I'm certain that many of you have been touched by missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls, and there are support people here with us today that if you need an ear or need someone to be with you, just please let us motion in some way, shape, or form, and we'll make sure we have the support available to you. We have, I'll talk about our knowledge and our wisdom council together. I just wondered, I'll introduce you in a moment, but I wondered if you could just raise your hands before we get into the next portion so people know where you are. Where's the wisdom committee? Stella, are you here? Suzanne? Jelida? There she is. Diane Ludwig. Where am I going now? I've got Manitoba. From Saskatchewan, we have Maria Campbell. She isn't available today. And we have another elder that sits on the committee with us. And I'd like to just take a moment to ask, to call for some prayers for Linda Boudreau. She's under the weather right now and can't be with us. And as someone pointed out to me a little while ago, she'd be chomping at the bit to be right here, right now. So I'll just ask you to remember her today. But where we want to go with this portion of the agenda is we had recently had some conversation with some government ministries about an implementation plan. So it's one thing to have all these calls for justice and our very own calls for change that we put forth in our report. But what's next? How do we implement them? What comes first? Where do we even start? Where does the government need to start to implement these changes and these calls to action? And the government has turned to us to begin that work around implementation. We have put in a request for funds, and we're just waiting to hear if that's successful. But as everything else is right now with the election cycle, it'll be a bit delayed. So, on our project proposal, we wanted to have an engagement session with each of the provinces. And unfortunately, the government has put some guidelines around that engagement has to take place before December 31st. And we will create a report on what implementation looks like for Métis women and for the Métis Nation. I just wanted to actually just pause here for a moment and ask President Omenaho to explain the relationship of the LFMO AGM carrying the file of MMIWG on behalf of the Métis National Council and the governing members.
Okay. First off, there's several pots getting thrown all into the apple and orange box here, but this report was one project that we did, and you'll see that we have 62 calls to justice. Actually, they use a term in here that that I don't know how to say. My elders would need to help me. Calls for Miskatoho or Miskataha. Anyway, I don't even know who got this word or where it was picked up, but it's calls for justice, and there's 62 of them that came from the work and the methodology and the research that we did that are our Métis calls to justice. So this report is going to the federal government. Actually, the calls have already gone to the federal government, and they are a part of what's being reviewed and worked on. The Wisdom Committee that was just talked about is a completely other project that's not a part of this report. The Wisdom Committee, what happened is there was a call for proposals for commemoration of missing and murdered Indigenous women and families. There was a call for national, provincial, and community-based initiatives. LFMO applied for a national initiative, and out of that national initiative, we have been approved for funding, and we are doing some commemoration enterprise kinds of things. We put together a wisdom committee made up of some of the people that Lisa named. Those people are going to work together collectively and have, some of them have already been talking, and we're going to be able to bring them together so that they're able to work on building a Métis-specific ceremony for Métis families to help them heal from the whole trauma-informed process that's gone on through many of these things. We're hoping that it will expand to more than just the missing and murdered, but will help be a healing initiative for for the women that have been impacted, but whether it's the Millennium Scoop, the 60 Scoop, the women have been detrimentally affected and often don't have a place to go for their own healing enterprises. And we're hoping our Wisdom Committee and Knowledge Keepers are going to be able to help create something that brings home for the Métis community that healing journey. That's what the Wisdom Committee is. So when it comes, though, to the implementation and what we've put forward, which is a completely other project, the federal government came to us and asked us how we seen them rolling out and following through with the recommendations, both from the inquiry report and our 62 recommendations. And they wanted us to have input into how we seen that. And what we told them when we met with them is that we needed our Métis governing bodies to work with us to come up with a plan for Métis families and Métis communities, that we didn't kind of entrust the thought that some other non-Indigenous agency or pan-Canadian approach was going to be able to do things to help our families. So what we put forward is that, and this is with the Métis National Council and the governing bodies, is we're developing a committee of people from that will be technical people, much like we do with all the permanent bilateral mechanisms that are worked on within MNC for priorities. We will have one for the missing murdered Indigenous women, and we will work with all the governing bodies, and we will keep the LFMO governing regional women's entities apprised of everything that we're doing, so they're feeding into what we want to do and how we want to see the recommendations fold out and implemented, because there may be recommendations in these documents, and I'm actually going to tell you, I'm pretty sure there are, that you're not going to want to see us push out. There's some very serious and complicated recommendations. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to read the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Report. I have to be honest, it's not an easy read. It's very triggering and trauma-based, so it's hard to read. But there are things in there that are coming from places that are going to have a lot of significant impacts on the justice system and how we look at life. So we need to really take and evaluate all those things in relationship to who we are. And that's what we're asking the government to give us the opportunity to do as a nation of people. So that is what the implementation plan is.
Thank you. And I'm sorry if I created any confusion. I just wanted to introduce the Wisdom Committee in advance in case anybody felt the need to have a support person around them. But thank you for clarifying that, President Omenaho. What we would like to talk about right now is the implementation. How do we bring these calls to justice and calls for change to action? So what we would like to do is, and I'm going to leave it up to you on how we want to do this, if you want to break out by province or if you want to stay in a large group to discuss it, this is your time. You can advise us how you want to do it. You can either break out or we can discuss it here, the two questions here. In the report that you have, it begins on page 100, are our calls to change. And we would like to know from your perspective, what is the priority when implementing the calls to justice or calls to change? And what are some of the calls that can be acted on immediately? So if we could, how would you like to do it? Do you want small groups or within your provinces, or do you want to remain at the table? Mishkatoha. I've been practicing. Did I pass? Okay, I'll probably get a spanking for that too. So do you want to stay in there? So we would like to take about 15, 20 minutes to discuss this. So would you want to break out to your provinces, or do you want to just open the conversation here?
Mishkotaha.
Mishkotaha. Thank you. Change.
Change.
Okay, so let's, hearing no preference, thank you very much, Charlotte. I do appreciate it. I tried to practice in the dictionary app on your phone. It tried to teach me to say it much better than I learned it. Okay, so I think we'll break out into our provinces. I think that's important to hear from a regional perspective on this. So if you want to take a corner of the room and one province up front, that's your choice. And we'll discuss starting on page 100 of our report. Sorry, did I hear something? I really can't see if there's any questions, so I'm sorry. I'm good? There is, that bright light is absolutely blinding, so I apologize again. So let's take about 15 minutes, 20 minutes in little groups, and we have some chart paper here, and then we'll ask you to report back. So what is a priority when implementing the calls to justice? And what are some of the calls that can be acted on immediately? And then the et cetera means any other comments you want to make about the calls for justice and the calls for change. And do you want to?
All right, if everyone could come back into the main room here, we're going to get started.
Good afternoon, ladies. I hope you had productive breakaway sessions. We're going to have our BC health person pass around the little device that you would get to do a at-home pap test thing, so that you kind of have a look at how unintimidating that little device is and why I got so excited about when I seen it. She's going to do that while we're doing other things. But Doreen's going to come up here right now. Today is October 4th, and today's the day that across Canada we honor our sisters in spirit who passed on because of the missing, murdered Indigenous women. And so we would like her to be able to say a prayer for us and a moment of silence. But the other thing I want to include in this is this past year, the First Métis Nation of British Columbia President Rose Bertolin passed away, and so I'd also like to send prayers to her. And for Pearl and Louis Belrose, their good friends died in a fishing accident. 4 of them were killed on the Slave Lake, the big lake up in the Northwest Territories, Upper Slave Lake. So if we could do some prayers and some thoughts for the people that we've lost. So, Doreen?
These dances are prayers. When we dance to the drum, we pray to the Creator and attract the heartbeat of the earth. We never dance without reason. Every dance has a purpose. We dance for rain. We dance for healing. We dance for seasons. We dance for joy. We dance for our children. We dance for people. We dance for courage. The drum plays to the beat of the heart, to the beat of the earth. The drum connects us to the earth while we dance our prayers. God, our Creator, let our dance and prayer be heard by you, remembering our missing and murdered Métis sisters, remembering the fishermen that didn't come home. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now we'll have a moment of silence for our sisters in spirit.
Thank you very much. Oh. Okay. Thank you all very much. I think that puts us in a good place to understand the impacts of our work this afternoon as we go forward and hear back from the groups about how we can bring these calls to action and calls for change forward. Would one of the provinces like to volunteer to begin to tell us what you talked about in your group? Other than that, we can go by alphabetical order. That would be the host province, wouldn't it? How about Alberta? Are you able to tell us about your discussion about what would be the priorities and what some of the calls could look like, could be acted on immediately? They're all? Okay, well, next in line is British Columbia. Oh, Marilyn, you can do it. It's worth it just to hear the giggle back there. Do you know how much I missed that? Okay, how about British Columbia then, and we'll leave pause for a moment for Alberta.
Hello, my name is Angel Robinson. One of the key messages that we took away from our discussion is that there's really a need for a holistic approach to implementation, as each category is overlapping, and it is not enough to look at each category in isolation. In particularly, we identified the Implementation Committee, Prevention and Awareness, and Identity as first steps. And I'll wait for a second for the writers to catch up.
They're writing furiously. We also have our very skilled note taker here, Megan, who's just absolutely fantastic. So thank you for all your work, Megan.
And the calls to or calls for justice or calls for change that we identified were numbers 1 to 5, 18, 42 and 43, 46 to 49 with particular attention to 49, 60, 61 and 62. And if anybody wants to add anything or commentary, please do.
Could I just get some clarification for the notes? Were those the calls for change or justice that you're referring to specifically?
The Métis version. Was it from this book here?
It was from this book, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And can I just add a couple of points?
I can add as well.
Okay. Oh, Alicia, do you want to go first?
I'll just get what you missed.
Okay. We talked, the elder in our group, Stella Rasmus Johnson, who's with us, she talked at length about supporting particularly our people who are marginalized and at risk in terms of more ways of supporting Métis identity when engaging with frontline services, medical, maybe interactions with police or justice, services for people who are at risk. It could include services for homeless or at risk of homelessness. We also talked about there being quite good opportunities to action right away, influencing greater support and information for Gladue report writers. We identified those under the justice section, and Myrna McCallum and myself are both in contact in British Columbia with folks who are with the Glad You Writers Society of BC. So that's something that we can action right away to move forward. Alicia?
Just more other actionable things that we could do right away is we did mention the identity and how she is Métis is moving forward with that, but other ones could be campaigns to get service providers and medical fields to ensure they put actually Métis on their forms for identification in terms of reconciliation. And just Angel also mentioned also about within research having more long-term evaluations that could be started now so that we have that information in the future in her reference to youth in care and long-term impact evaluations.
Maybe just two other points. We have a health data matching system in British Columbia where any Métis citizen who has consented to health data matching, there's tracking with respect to interactions with the medical system. So for some of our Métis women at risk, I think we need to talk with our Ministry of Health and with the province about extrapolating information from that data matching that might help to inform demographics of Métis women at risk in British Columbia. The other part, we had talked about continued pressure and advocacy with BC Yukon Society of Transition Houses in terms of expanding their identification. Because in our interactions with them previously, we do know that women and children who are either in children who witness violence counseling programs or women and families who engage the services of Transition House in British Columbia, we need to put more pressure on them politically to include that kind of demographic information sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Just missed one more point about Myrna also mentioned prior to engagement that we require a standard of Métis specific trauma-informed training for engagement for those who want to engage with the Métis.
And sorry, we keep going back and forth here. We talked about already there's some initiatives in terms of doing those trauma-informed Métis presentations that police, medical practitioners, and we know that the Ministry of Children and Family is engaging in BC on an expansive training for all their staff with respect to understanding Métis-specific impacts of colonization and our particular story. In BC, there's quite a large emphasis on BC First Nations history and impacts of colonization, and there's not a great depth of understanding about Métis stories, so thank you.
Thank you very much. That was quite extensive and well appreciated. Are you ready yet, Alberta? Or?
Okay, you're such a brat. First of all, we didn't get a chance to go through all of these outcomes and questions as we were just seeing this document today, but we believe they should all be implemented. I noticed some of the stuff that we did talk about. One would be education. Educating all of the people who are not just the ladies or the at risk, but all of the Métis population across the homeland. Education needs to be taught, first of all, in the judicial system, where we feel that that's the biggest barrier is in the judicial system. The RCMP, before they hit the ground running, for example, when I did a presentation in Cold Lake, and I was speaking with the chief of police, and what he said was, when the new recruits come to this area, they're surrounded by 3 reserves and 2 Métis settlements, and they're there to shoot first and ask questions later. And so that's being taught in the RCMP brigade or wherever they're being trained. So education on their part, and to have policies that are put into place with our definition our definition of who Métis is, and so that the people who understand not just our distinctness, but where we come from, who we are as individuals, and until you fully understand who we are and where we come from, then you can explore our differences and the ways to deal with all Métis people within all of the systems, but particularly the judicial system. And then we also talked about educating our young girls. We talk about early childhood care and learning. We need to instill into them that you are strong, you're beautiful, and you're proud, and you have just as much right to be here as anybody else. We talked about how sometimes we don't feel valued, so we don't go vote. Because they're like, this airport isn't built for me. It's built for everybody else that lives in Calgary. So we don't feel like we're a part of the system. And so then we're already stepping back. So by teaching our children that at the very beginning is, yes, those roads are being built for you, that legislative building is built for you, and you have the right to be here, and you have the right to be safe. So education is key. Implementing, I would like to see them all implemented right away, but I believe that if we do create an education program for the frontline workers so that they understand who we are and where we come from as a people, would be a great step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I guess we're on to, I have to learn my alphabet again, I think Manitoba.
Thank you. So the first question you had is, what is the priority when implementing calls to justice and change? So first of all, I want to thank everyone that took part in doing the report. So what was our number one priority is to educate ourselves on what missing and murdered Indigenous women are. In the province of Manitoba, majority of programs and services, any stats or anything we get is First Nations geared. So if we don't know what we're looking at, how can we educate the general public? How can we educate the Métis citizens and our families across our homeland? The second one we talked about is updated research and programs. So what kind of programs, what kind of services are available in the province of Manitoba and at national level? The third one we talked about was the biggest block is financial supports for any research, for any programs and supports that are Métis specific. Every time you make an announcement of money, it's always First Nations or money's going to the RCMP or money's going to universities. What about money coming down to the Métis people? So another one we have is realistic timelines, reporting back to our citizens on what we learned, on what the file is all about. Because you have to have realistic timelines. We meet once a year and it comes up once a year. So we have quarterly reports, or should we report back to each of the provinces so we know what we're doing? We got the report last night and we have to report on it in 10 or 15 minutes. So in the last one we had was evaluation of programs and services in place. In the province of Manitoba, everything they record, they always record us under First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. So we have to know the research on what's available. Is there Métis citizens using the programs and services? How can we get a breakdown of the research and the numbers